All right, guys. Well, welcome to the Life Safety Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today, I got a couple special guests, and I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
All right, I'm Kurt Neubek. I'm an architect and a national practice leader for healthcare for Page Sutherland Page, architecture engineering firm. I'm based in the Houston office. We have offices around the country.
Yeah, and I'm Brian Gray. I also work with Page, and I'm the regional healthcare director here located in Houston.
Okay, and how long have you guys been in your respective roles, or just been in that field?
Yeah, I've been an architect for about 30 years. I've been with Page for 25 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I've also been at Page for about 25 years. I've spent half of my career in Dallas and now half of my career in Houston.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, getting into the life safety of things, I did want to talk about the design aspect of what goes into it when you guys are putting in the design effort for the life safety portion. And specifically, I'm talking smoke compartments, smoke barriers, fire barriers. We know some of those are warranted based on the occupancy or function of that room. But what about the smoke barriers? Because I know that you guys have the power to kind of mind that and figure out how you want to divide that accordingly. So what kind of thought process goes into creating these smoke compartments?
Smoke compartment, generally speaking, you're going to need there's a maximum size for a smoke compartment, 22,500 square feet, I believe it is.
Right.
You really need to consider the exiting out of the compartments, for instance. One of the rules of thumb is that we cannot exit the compartment and then enter back into the compartment to hit into a stairwell.
Right.
So we have to make sure that we have egress access, outside of that compartment. Generally, a compartment, one of the purposes for the compartment is so that they can move patients horizontally on a floor before they have to evacuate a patient down. So from a healthcare perspective, the value of the smoke compartment allows them to keep patients on a floor but contained in an area that may not be an event, a fire event, while they hopefully extinguish the fire event. Before then, they need to make a decision to move a patient outside of a hospital. So we have to make sure that we account for enough space in each compartment that allows for the number of stretchers or the number of patients that may be contained in the adjacent compartment. So you couldn't design one too small next to one that's larger because you may not be able to put enough patients on that side of the compartment. So they give you a certain 30 square foot per patient allowance that you need to make sure that you maintain.
Right. No, that's important.
Space on the other compartment side.
And as a general rule, on the upper floors, on the patient units, you're generally going to divide that in half because you have to have at least two smoke compartments on the patient floor on a unit. And then on the floors above or directly above or below that, similar rules. On other floors, then you have more latitude. Then the larger size is what dictates. But then we also have to look at travel distance both out of that, not only to an exit, but also you have to be able to exit any given smoke compartment within 200 feet from any point. So that's why you end up with those lines sort of gerrymandered sometimes, because you come up with this is roughly where it belongs, but now where's the most reasonable wall to put that on?
Right.
And limit the number of doors and places where it's going to pass through that could be problematic.
Right.
Makes sense.
So we might ask, why is it required to have a smoke compartment above a floor that has patient care? What if there's no patients on the floor above or the floor below? And I think that the logic would probably be so that they could then, if the event that's occurring on your floor begins to infiltrate both or all the compartments or the adjacent compartments, maybe they can move you up one floor to help then extinguish it, or even down a floor before, again, they have to move patients to the outside, because that's really the last thing they want to have to do.
Right.
The weather conditions, the patient conditions, trying to protect them in place as much as possible.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about one of the things that's more prevalent here in newer designs is suites. And we're in the context of life safety, we're talking about essentially a room with a bunch of rooms in it, one big, larger room. So what goes into the thought process for suites, and what are some of the benefits of having a suite within a healthcare occupancy?
Okay. Well, suites, they've been evolving in the last several iterations of the life safety code. And they're actually becoming more and more beneficial in the sense they're becoming a little larger in the more recent code adoptions. And they allow you can do things in a suite that you couldn't do in a corridor situation. So basically, every occupiable room needs to have a door that is directly attached to a corridor so that you can get out of that room and into a corridor. Well, a suite gives you that allowance to have multiple rooms within an area, and then the exit from that suite, which is, as you've referenced, is like the room, exits to a corridor. So it gives you more flexibility from a healthcare planning standpoint, what you can do in a suite. Your rooms don't have to be all self-contained. They can be somewhat open. You can even have medical gases kind of in an open bay environment within a suite that you can't do more on a corridor situation.
And we're talking, of course, about inpatient hospital.
Correct.
I2 occupancy in this conversation. Because the other advantage from an operator's point of view, there are rules about the amount of clutter and furniture and equipment and things like that you can have in a corridor.
One of the top findings during surveys is corridor clutter.
Right. I was going to say, as you well know, and so if we can design it as a suite as opposed to counting as an official corridor, then that gives the operators more flexibility. They can have more things in the corridor, in the hallway. It's not
right.
If we make it other than counting as
it's
a corridor.
No longer an exit access corridor.
Right.
It looks like a corridor, but in the context of what we're talking about, it's more just a hallway or an aisle.
Right. Yeah. For those who are having trouble following this, imagine there's a main corridor down the middle of a building, of a hospital, and if you picture a suite essentially like a U-shaped hallway with rooms around it, maybe a nurse station in the middle and a bunch of other little rooms or alcoves or even curtain bay areas around that. That's a very common situation that would be counted as a suite. And as Brian said, you can have gases there, you can have curtained areas and things because they're not technically on a corridor that way.
I would add another big advantage would be the doors wouldn't have to latch that open to this aisle in lieu of a corridor. Oftentimes they have sliding doors and whatnot. And to your point, they could be open or they could have doors that don't necessarily have to latch. And that's a big deal when dealing with those doors on egress corridors. So, yeah, suites are definitely beneficial.
A couple of examples of suites you would see and very common in healthcare environments would be for a post-anesthesia care unit, for instance. You have lots of just open curtain bays. Nursing is taking care of lots of patients at one time. They can keep the curtains open. They can see many patients down the aisle, and all your medical gases are right there available. Another example might be in an ED, kind of a fast track treatment area where maybe you're bringing patients in, and instead of putting them in a treatment room, you can kind of have them maybe in even chairs or just kind of available to have gases and things like that in more quick triage like nursing modeling. But there's something really that we have to consider when we do suites is that the medical gas zone valve box has to be hidden from the actual gas that is on the wall.
That's a great point.
Like around the corner on a separate wall.
It can't be in direct line of sight.
Direct line of sight.
Right.
Presumably, if there was a fire at maybe coming from the medical gas outlets, you need to be able to get around a wall away from the fire to turn.
Right. You don't want to have to go through the fire to shut the fire off. That's a great point. Definitely. And also within the design of corridors, kind of going into corridors now, I've seen a lot of a big influx of the design of alcoves, purposeful alcoves. Are y'all still seeing that? Is that implemented into designs here for modern healthcare designs to alleviate that corridor clutter where it is an actual egress corridor?
Oh yeah, absolutely. For that very reason. I mean, that's what drives it. And yes, it takes space, but if there are things that need to be in the corridor, a crash cart, for example, or things that you want to have right on hand, then designing a place for them so they're not sticking out into the corridor and have a recess is acceptable and a good idea. We see that with not only the crash carts, but what are called cows or wows or BMWs, which is the computers on wheels.
Right.
That again, we're planning more places for those so when they're plugged into the wall, or even just when they're stacked up somewhere, they're not in the corridor.
BMW,
makes sense.
That's something mobile workstation.
Yeah, right.
I don't know what the B is. So and so one of the things that we do focus on when we do alcoves, we've had different jurisdictions have different comments on an alcove. They don't seem to be on the same page, but what we can stand behind, we believe, is if we keep that alcove less than 50 square feet, so it's a non-hazardous alcove, and make sure we have a sprinkler head located in the alcove. We do have jurisdictions that want to make sure that the equipment there is very mobile. It's not something that's going to be permanent there. They want to see it moving around the unit quite often.
Right.
And so they are interested in it. But if we separate them and keep them at less than 50 feet, we can usually do those. Some will say that there might be a maximum number of those within a smoke compartment, but we haven't seen too many jurisdictions really enforce that quite yet. But it is something to be aware of.
Well, and if you are storing flammable or trash cans or something like that, then that there are limits to how many of those you can have in one smoke compartment.
Definitely. Okay. And what about also touching in on corridor, now going into fixed furniture? Are you guys implementing that into the design? Of course, there's some now new allowances to have fixed furniture within the corridor, which kind of seems like that wouldn't be the case in today's standards. But is that something that you see being implemented or not necessarily?
I've not seen clients being requesting that to, technically somewhat narrow down the corridor. It does seem like it's an opportunity. We do see lots of furniture solutions these days that are electrified. So in the waiting areas and things like that, there's what we are seeing as a big trend is to provide power opportunities for people to connect their phones, even phone charging areas.
Oh, definitely,
if
right.
you don't bring your own cable. So, but I haven't seen, we haven't done planning that is so tight in a urban setting or maybe or something of that nature that we need to start putting furniture into the corridors. It's just not been the types of work.
Yeah, because it's a good point. And now that it's allowed, or there is an allowance for that, but I haven't seen it in any projects in any of our offices around the country.
Oh, okay.
Where we've been doing
Oh, wow. All right. And what are some of the general challenges that you guys face when you're designing healthcare? I mean, I know that could be its own conversation altogether, but just in general, what are some challenges you see, design challenges on a healthcare?
Well,
or one of the major challenges, I would say, because like I said, there could be a bunch of them.
there are a lot of them.
I think we're looking at each other because who wants to jump in?
Yeah, right. All right, I'll start.
You almost have to hit that button. Right?
We have to start, of course, with regulations. There's so many regulations.
Oh my God, there is.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of architects over the years, and I say we do any kind of building type out there except healthcare, because they know you really, really have to know what you do, and you have to have experience in all those regulations. Because the fact that we have normally 4 different authorities having jurisdiction is a surprise to architects who are used to only
having one. And what could those
one.
4 normally be? Can you the typical 4? What's going to be what? CMS,
right?
The state,
right?
The Joint Commission or your whatever accreditation
right.
body, DNV or HVAP.
Yep.
And then the local fire marshal.
That's right.
The handicap requirements,
ADA requirements.
So there's maybe a 5th as well.
Right.
So, yeah.
Sure.
Speaking of that, jumping into that's taken on a lot of the design aspect as well, right? You got life safety versus ADA. One of the ones that pops up right away is the 4-inch rule from ADA, but then life safety code allows, I think, 4.5 inches or 6 inches projections. Or is that being something you see being enforced now as well?
Well, we just have to make sure everyone understands. Yes, even though you're going to read that this rule says 6, 4 dictates. So because whenever you have multiple regulations like that, we just have to make sure we're studying and know which one dictates.
Follow the most stringent.
You do need to follow the most stringent. And a great example of the most stringent is that in the International Building Code, it restricts us to a 20-foot dead-end corridor in an I2 occupancy. Well, if we were looking at the Life Safety Code, NFPA 101, it allows a 30-foot dead-end corridor. So when we meet with the state authorities to discuss our plan, and they're thinking of it in terms of NFPA 101, a corridor beyond 20 feet is not a big issue for them. But if you're under a jurisdiction that uses an IBC, you have to be aware of that. So many conditions like that, they're where the most stringent requirement is.
And that's a good segue into my other question or other topic is, I call it life safety versus IBC. And of course, the life safety code versus IBC, because to your point, the state isn't going to mandate IBC, IFC rules, but then from an accreditation standpoint, you're going to be held to the life safety code. So is that something you guys take into consideration as far as making sure you're following both the life safety code and the IBC? Because to get your state license, you just need to follow IBC. But then here comes the Joint Commission, HVAP or DNV. And one example that comes to mind is on life safety code, they don't require smoke dampers on a 1 hour smoke barrier, but the IBC does. So then IBC takes over, and now you have to put the smoke dampers. I'm trying to think of another one that comes to mind. Maybe you guys know, but there's some differences, some subtle differences that can, catch you in the end and be in a bit of a dilemma. So what kind of challenges do you guys see from that perspective? Because of course they're accredited, and they want to get that reimbursement and maintain their accreditation. Then they also have to follow the state and get that license to occupy.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. One of the drives I understand is that I think ASHI is trying to coordinate the model codes, trying to get them to be where basically we can see one model code and
Have them sync up. That'd be nice.
But for now, because jurisdictions approve their code on a separate timeline than maybe CMS or the state, we can see a flux of the difference in the years. For instance, if the life safety code is allowing a greater sweep acceptance, like we talked about earlier, the IBC is not caught up to that yet if the local jurisdiction hasn't approved those model codes. So you're still having to make sure you understand which model code they're under and follow, the most stringent requirement in that regard.
Yeah, when you mentioned ASHI, American Society of Healthcare Engineers, they have over the years put together a document or published a document that I think was originally written by Rolf Jensen, or it might have been Jensen Hughes by then, that did a good side-by-side comparison of nearly every requirement of the IBC and Life Safety Code to show which one would be the most stringent.
Oh, nice.
And but as Brian said, and because those things keep changing, we have to also keep up with what are those changes and now which one is the most stringent. But yeah, you just have to establish that ahead of time and make sure the entire team understands which regulations we're following. Because there's another one too that has to do with egress, the width of the egress doors in the stair. It's either the door or the stair. One of the regulations is 0.2 inches and the other is 0.3. And again, you have to use the more stringent.
Another example that comes to mind is, and I believe it comes from the IBC IFC, is on the smoke barriers. It requires 20-minute rated doors, labeled 20-minute doors. So when we go out and check fire doors, we're seeing a lot of labeled 20-minute doors. But then the life safety code is a little more lax and allows you to have a non-labeled door, non-rated door, so long as it's 1 3/4 inch thick. Right. And that has bearings on as far as having to maintain these doors. Because once it's a labeled door, it has to be maintained per NFPA 80. Whereas if it wasn't a labeled fire rated assembly door, then it's not as stringent and it doesn't abide by those codes. So I see that also to be an issue versus IBC versus life safety code. But it would be nice if they sync up those codes and have everybody on one accord for sure.
And what I'm seeing on those doors, in particular cross corridor doors in a
Right.
smoke compartment, is the inspectors are looking at the gap between the doors, seeing if there's a rabbet or a bevel edge or some way to close off that gap, and be sure not to forget the window that has to go in that door.
Yeah, the glazing kit, the vision kit for sure. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. Wanted to ask you, what for each of you, what's been your most challenging project to date? And I'm talking more healthcare, because I know you guys don't just do healthcare, but I know you guys obviously aren't inclined with healthcare. But what's been one of your most challenging? And it could be from a timeline crunch to this design to having an existing building adjacent to it. Just in general, what sticks out to you when I say, oof, that was a tough one?
Yeah, they all hold their challenges, especially major building expansions. That's when they really get into a challenging situation. For instance, an example might be a large hospital that we're doing an expansion to here locally in the Baytown region. It's an older hospital, but we're adding a pretty sizable expansion. Well, of course, all the egress, exit doors, never considered that you might build a building next to it. And so now we have to think about, how are our stairs coming down? How are we exiting out the building? But I guess the lesson learned on that part would be, at the ground floor in particular, because we have to exit, we can only travel a certain amount of distance between our exits. You start getting into a large floor plate where you can't get people from the center of the building all the way up to the exterior.
To the exit discharge?
To an exit discharge.
Right.
So we're looking at horizontal exits. They're really coming into play quite a bit.
Good point.
Like that.
Yeah. Because otherwise it'd be just exiting to internal. You're only allowed so many of those.
Right. So
right.
An
interior
exit,
exit.
you're essentially exiting into another building. You have fire hose cabinets on each side of that door within a certain distance, and you have to make sure you meet those requirements.
So a horizontal exit, and maybe you can, the way I try to explain what that is, it's pretty much a horizontal stairwell without the stairs. It's just flat. So it's just an extension of that vertical stairwell. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And we do also take advantage of the fact that we can have up to 50% of our stairs actually exit to the interior discharge, where you can see a door or the exit from the point where you discharge from that stairwell. So if you're burying a stair inside of a building that may have used to been an exterior stair, you just have to make sure that you're allowing a visible line of sight, and you're adding a new stair in your building, so you're keeping that 50% load. So you're not doing more than 50% of your stairs exiting to the interior of a building.
Yeah, and for the audience that might not be familiar with horizontal exits, it's really sort of a magical concept, because you can have, let's say, a multi-story high-rise building. And I remember years ago we had, and there was a floor near the top of the building, and they wanted to put in other classrooms and things, and so it increased the density. The number of people on the floor was too much for the exit capacity of the stairs. So we're able to come up with, if you just put a horizontal exit, basically cut the building, that floor only, cut that floor in half, essentially put a wall down the middle of it that separates those into two separate buildings.
And that would be like a 2-hour rated wall?
A 2-hour rated wall. And as Brian said, they have to have fire hose cabinets on each side of the doors that are the horizontal exits. But you've just doubled the exit capacity, or the personnel capacity on a floor, without actually changing the stairs or the width of the stairs. So
nice.
it can be really, really valuable.
And in this case, you would have a structure that's already rated to the 2-hour floors, and so that you can maintain that 2-hour rating by putting a wall there. The floor structure and the ceiling structure are carrying that 2-hour rating to the exterior and things like that. If for some reason, if your structure was a lighter rating, then you'd have to deal with it in a different situation, I think.
Nice. So, okay. What about you, Kurt?
I'll take a slightly different tack. We've worked all around the world on healthcare projects, and I remember when I was working in China years ago, we made a trip there. They selected us to team with a local Chinese firm, and they were very excited. We were excited. It was a great project. And when we first arrived, they said, okay, well, your role is going to be the programmer and healthcare planner. So we told them, all right, here's how we do it. Here's how you lay out a hospital. And they said, okay, but that's not the way we do it. And I said, well, then why are we here? I thought you just said our role is to show you how the sort of Western approach to this. And what we learned was, once we started having some dialogue, that became much, much more interesting. I mean, that's where, that's where the magic happened, about finding what is it they like and what can they not give up, and what do we need to learn about the way they deliver healthcare that they want to keep, that they just feel is part of the culture or so ingrained in the way they do business that won't be able to change. And what are the things that they're open to? And a lot of it was architecture and bringing more Joint Commission sort of thinking to the facilities and those sorts of things. So it was a fascinating time. It took us a couple weeks to find that balance. But once we did, then everything went smoothly, and it was a great team. And we still work with that firm periodically, because we established such a good rapport then.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Another thing I would kind of mention as a challenge in healthcare is when we have infants in the building, we're usually looking at an overlay security system for infant protection.
Right.
And
put a baby low jack on there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Basically, if an infant band, whether it's wrist-based or maybe ankle-based, is detected close to an exit door, the entire unit can shut down, or at least that door wherever it's detected can lock immediately, and so that people cannot steal a baby, really. And then we have to bring that sometimes into the elevator and just make sure things are shutting down. But then you have to coordinate closely with your authority, because we can only have like one magnetic lock door in an entire egress pathway. So if you've sacrificed your magnetic lock door somewhere on the infant level, then you've got to make sure that your egress is free from that point forward.
So what would you do? What are some options there? Maybe some delayed egress integrated with that?
Actually, delayed egress is an option for sure. And but we do have, even the authorities will allow exit doors leading into a stairwell to have magnetic locks in an infant security protection
Oh, wow.
system.
That's a game changer for
It's a
sure.
game changer.
Okay. I guess here I would want to veer off a little bit off the life safety topic. And Kurt, I saw a presentation you did several years ago. It was at the Texas Medical Center, and it was getting decisions that stick.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a pretty powerful presentation because it's one of those presentations where you kind of know it, but when someone tells you it, it just resonates more. And I remember just one of the topics was just making decisions with emotions. I remember hearing that line. Can you kind of touch on that and summarize that presentation and what the gist of that was?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. I speak a lot at conferences around the country, and that one really struck a chord. I've struck a nerve. There's something that really captures and captivates people about that. Almost every time I present it, someone comes up and says, "Oh, can you give this at this other venue?" And I was keynote at a healthcare conference in Florida with 1,200 people because someone saw me give it in Charlotte.
Right.
I think it's because you have the interactive piece where you're ordering from the menu and you're trying to decide what you want to order. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is an awesome piece. I remember that.
And the part of that story, because that's sort of really the heart of it. What we do is we have show people how to do some live polling. We get everyone to pull out their phone and text. Show them how to get them linked up in the system, and then we show. First slide is here's 3 different options for your lunch. Option A, B, C, and then we get people to vote, and you can see, and then it shows up live on the screen. There's a bar graph that shows, or a column graph that shows. All right, how did people vote?
I usually choose the hamburger first.
Yeah, so it's a club sandwich, a burger, fries, and shake, and salmon with salad. And so then I say, just basic, here's the scope. Which would you like? And people make a decision. Then we say, oh, by the way, here's the cost of each of those. Now, does that change your decision?
Right. Throw some variables in there. Right.
And then we talk about the time. Scope, schedule, and budget.
Right.
And then once you have that information, and then it changes the decision. And then throw in some other qualitative aspects about if this one is made by a local startup, maybe people like that. One of them is made by an evil multinational conglomerate. Another one is a shop that a friend of yours owned, or you designed, or you built it. So you have a connection to that. Does that affect your decision? And then I point out that after they keep changing their mind, I say, you guys are so fickle. You're driving me nuts. But then I point out that I ask, now, how did that happen? Who did that? And I say, I did that. I did that to you. I caused all that indecision by the way I presented the information to you. And so the real question is, how often are we doing that to our customers or to our clients or to our team? Anytime you're asking someone for a decision, are you giving them all the information they need the first time? And not too much, because if you give them a lot of red herring stuff, that just causes other problems. But give them all the information they'll need, and then we talk a lot about what are the kinds of information people will need, and what the way people make decisions, the psychology of decision making. And to your point, that to many people they make decisions based on emotion first, and they justify with facts. Not everyone does that, but there are some people that really believe that that's the way decisions get made, and clearly there are some people who do that.
Well, I think, too, a major lesson I've learned from that program is having the right decision makers in the room. We've had a lot of times when we have a group of people, and we've learned to ask up front if these will be the people that will be making the decisions, as well as try to understand, will there be people added to later who might have interest and might influence the decision. So that's a key element, I think, to your presentation.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we go through 10 or 12 specific things you can do today on your projects to start improving the way you get decisions and getting decisions that stick.
Nice. All right. Well, anything else you guys want to chat about regarding life safety?
Well, it's something else that have been thinking about challenges is, in particular, users request a lot of things on how does their door hardware operate, for instance.
Okay.
We may have a lot of card readers showing up, a lot of automatic doors operating, showing up, and a lot of security. And of course, with the latching situation, when we need to be able to latch, we have to understand if the doors are in a corridor situation or
suite boundary.
Or suite boundary that need to latch. So it's a real challenge to bring all of that coordinated together. It makes things very complex. And so we're trying to spend more efforts focusing on that to make sure that that it is coordinated early, it's coordinated with the owners, it's got a good understanding of the solutions and implementation, because it is a source of consternation really with hospitals who have things in the end that didn't work like they wanted it to. So that's something that I see is becoming more and more complex, integrating all of that with the fire alarm system to make it successful.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And I remember a post-occupancy evaluation that we did to a hospital, and they loved it. It was a fantastic project, but we did learn a couple things that just didn't turn out quite the way they expected. Everything was built to spec. It technically worked correctly, but the users, the families, were having trouble using it. In this particular situation, where you exit this unit, it was closed, and where there might normally be a push plate to exit, there happened to be a storage room there. So where you might expect the push plate, there was already a door that had a card key, which then pushed what would have been the push plate a little farther away.
Which confused folks.
And they made it a wave plate, which is further new to people. So then they had to have this big sign that says with an arrow, push wave here, and people still didn't understand it. So if it were a staff that's there all the time, they could learn about wave plates quickly. But since you have visitors and family who are not regulars, there are things like that it was exactly what people wanted, but it's not working as well as they would have liked. So,
what about ED waiting rooms? It's a big topic with the coronavirus and other airborne things that could happen. Are y'all seeing an influx of having more enclosed waiting rooms and not so much open to the adjacent areas and the common areas? And I know a lot of the older healthcare facilities were just designed that way, but you're supposed to maintain a negative pressured environment in the waiting room, the ED waiting room specifically. Is that something that's being taken into consideration to make sure that negative pressure is feasible from a design aspect? It's enclosed and has doors that can enclose it?
I would say that in ED waiting rooms, we want a lot of visibility from, maybe a large staff station area so they can see how their patients are. But we do also kind of create separate zones, let's just say, and sometimes those can become different environments of entertainment. Some are quiet, some might have a certain television show on, some might be for children.
Charging stations or whatnot for phones.
Charging stations. So it gives people a little smaller personal space. It's not been a real consideration about the spread of disease necessarily within that waiting room and how we're containing that. But maybe the smaller sub-wait areas help with that. But it's generally speaking, it is somewhat to give staff visibility of each of those so they can make sure they can observe what's going on in those rooms.
And I haven't yet had a client that asked us to do anything differently because of coronavirus. But a few years back, everyone remembers when Ebola came out, we designed an Ebola treatment center, one of the newest ones in the country here in Houston. And at the time, we not only studied what was happening, what other people were doing, but also for years after that, when we were presented at conferences and just keeping up on things, some of the things that people were doing based on Ebola is that when you first come in, part of it is, first of all, protocol. And back then, you would ask patients, for example, have you traveled to these countries?
Right.
And nowadays, today, people at clinics and hospitals, in emergency departments, they will ask you, have you been to China in the last 2 years or 2 months or 2 weeks, whatever.
Right.
So and then there might be a protocol that says, if they say yes, then you hand them a mask and you walk them to an infectious isolation room. So some of that happens just based on protocol and operations. But you do need a place where they can come in negative or where they can go. Some places would actually have a separate suite. So if you knew you had people who were infectious or suspected of being infected.
Almost like an isolation suite.
Yes, but as part of the emergency department, like have its own little
Right.
infectious waiting room.
Okay.
And come in, and and some of them are very small, so it'd really just take them into a triage room, like you might with some other kind of decontamination room,
Right,
like a
right.
decontamination room you'd see in an emergency department, but closer to the front door,
Right.
so that could have a similar sort of flow.
Yeah, it makes sense because you don't know if they're just coming in fresh and they come in, they say yes, potentially they might have already contaminated in the air, and now it's more prone to being spread more readily.
Yeah, I think the thought is if you have the flu-like symptoms or whatever it might be, maybe stay home, maybe call your doctor before
Right.
you actually show up in a waiting room and potentially contaminate others that are around you.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And what about? I know about 4 or 5 years ago there was an influx of urgent cares. Are you? Is that still on the horizon? Are you still seeing a lot of
Absolutely.
urgent cares being designed and being called for design? Smaller EDs, if you will, basically what urgent cares are.
Yeah, so we absolutely are seeing them, and one of the reasons for that is in Texas we went through a big influx of freestanding emergency departments,
Right.
and we're still seeing. In fact, we just had 2 of those open just a week or 2 ago in El Paso that we designed. So there's still a place for freestanding emergency departments as well, but there was, during sort of the heyday, there were a lot of people that built them. They were like McDonald's and Burger King. They were competing in corners, and
Right.
and people didn't always understand that some of them were out of network, or some of them were cash only, and so many of those organizations ended up with bad debt, and so some of those have gone out of business because most of the public does not understand the difference between urgent care and emergent care.
What is the difference?
Yeah, so emergency is essentially something that you would go to an emergency center for, where you're going to have the kind of testing and things that are really
Some kind of trauma.
life-threatening.
Yeah. Okay.
Chest pains, things like that. Those are emergencies. Things that you could go to your doctor for if your doctor were just available, or an same day clinic, or that's what urgent care is.
And also not seeing like CT or X-ray and urgent care as much as you would see. So if you have a broken bone or something of that nature, you'd want to show up probably at an emergency room.
Right, and so urgent care there have been studies that show the same malady that you show up at urgent care versus emergency. The emergent care is 7 to 10 times as much for the same treatment.
Oh wow, yeah, that's what I've heard.
So you really want to go to urgent care if you can. And there are some organizations. Texas Children's here is I think it's a fantastic model. I really think it's a leader in this issue, in this topic. They're building they have built right next to their emergency center an urgent care right next to it, literally side by side.
Oh, so you have the option.
Right. They have a whole series of urgent cares around the city, so that people who know how to use them, especially for pediatrics or folks, if you're in Sugar Land or somewhere, you don't want to go into the med center, but you want Texas Children's care,
Right.
Then you can go to that urgent care.
The interesting thing about those too is though you can't really share a waiting room. You have to have a separate front door entrance.
Well, that's what I was going to ask from a design aspect. What kind of occupancy is that tasked with? Is it business? Is it ambulatory? Or is it healthcare?
So it is business is the minimum. It can
Okay.
be in business. It could be in higher, but it can be business. So then they have to be separated. But the reason it hasn't happened sooner is that there's a law called EMTAL, Emergency Medicine something Act, and which says that when someone comes to emergency department, you cannot deny them treatment based on their ability to pay.
Right.
And so emergency departments are not allowed to tell someone, no, you belong next door, or you that's not an emergency, you have to go down the street. But what they will do, at Texas Children's, for example, at least as I understand it, they to give full credit, I might get this slightly wrong, but you come in and they will there's a word they call it's not triage, but there's it escapes me, but they essentially check you into screening, I think is the word they use. They screen you, and they say to find out everything, your basics, stats, and such, and then say, okay, sit down, have a seat, and we'll see you in, it'll probably be 2 or 3 hours. Or if you go right through the door there, there's no waiting.
There you go.
And
That's one
so
way to
then
do
they
it.
say, okay, then they discharge them technically from the emergency department, and so people can go over there.
And that's obviously based off their screening. Now they know that an urgent care could care for that those symptoms.
Exactly. And by having them side by side, the general public doesn't have to know the difference. If they show up to the wrong one, now at the urgent care, they can tell them, oh no, that's an emergency. We're going to take you right in to the trauma room or whatever.
Right.
So by having them side by side, it's a brilliant solution. But they are also able to operate the urgent care side in a way that is lower cost. So it's a fantastic model. Best of both
And
worlds.
it's really critical that the public doesn't really understand the difference between urgent care and emergency care. So there are brochures, there are marketing tools that help actually describe the conditions that you might have, and are you a candidate for urgent care or should you see emergency care? And that information should continue to be broadcast more publicly so people do understand, especially now that the facilities are available. Let's get the information available as it comes out.
Oh, sounds good. All right, guys. Well, I think we're ready to wrap up. And before we do that, I would like to go ahead and you guys have contact information so the audience wants to get a hold of you or get a hold of your colleagues. How would they get a hold of you guys?
Look us up at pagethink.com.
Okay.
That's our website. And of course, Kurt and I are both on there. And you could email K. Neubek, if you can spell his name, at pagethink.com or bgray, B-G-R-A-Y, at pagethink.com.
And can they find you on LinkedIn as well?
Yep,
Yes,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Both
All
of
right.
us. Mhm.
All right. Well, I thank you guys for coming out and taking the time to be interviewed on the Life Safety Podcast.
And thank you, Ruben. In fact, Ruben, that's on LinkedIn. That's where Ruben and I first met each other.
Yeah, that is where you were. I know we were supposed to have a conversation or meet up in between. You took a liking to my post, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I'll try to put some more out there.
Yeah, it's very valuable information. Thank you for sharing that.
No,
with the
thank you.
community.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.